A young private, Adolf Hitler, admires the Muslim forces of the Ottoman army. He doesn't trust many non-German populations, but the Muslims are one he fully gets behind, and he says, right, we can form brigades, we can give them arms, all the rest of it. They turn to Muslims in the Caucasus, in Crimea, in Azerbaijan, in Turkmenistan, Georgia, Armenia.
Well, even within Russia, there's still a significant Muslim population.
Well, precisely. So the British appoint Amin al-Husseini. He starts out as a cooperative player in the region, but soon turns on the British, organising resistance to both them and the incoming Jewish migration to Palestine. Hitler receives the Mufti with great pomp. The Mufti uses this opportunity, quite intelligently, to say, now, Mr. Hitler, this is all very well and good, we agree on lots of things, but what are you going to do about Palestine?
Welcome back to the Echo Changer podcast, episode 4. We're still here. We're still going.
Episode 4.
I know.
We're getting so much content.
Can you tell we just started this?
You're feeling spoiled, yeah. So we've just been talking about the Nazi IRA links, and now for perhaps a spicier connection, and possibly more controversial.
Also unknown, I think, as well.
I think so.
I feel like obviously people sometimes know about like the North Africa campaigns and like obviously like Suez Canal and the strategic value of North Africa and the kind of Arabic countries, but it's never really spoken about.
No, it's true. Yeah. So here we are, the Nazi-Arab alliances in World War II. So we're going to go a little bit back to the First World War, to the German-Ottoman alliance. A young private, Adolf Hitler, admires the Muslim forces of the Ottoman army. He sees in them strong fighters. On the broader scale, the Germans at large are trying their best to work out how it is that they can, because they've obviously got the Ottomans, but the Ottomans are crumbling, it's all kind of falling apart for them. They're trying to work out how they can mobilize Arab tribes, Arab populations against their enemies.
Also to maintain influence in the region. Too.
Yeah, quite, exactly. And in that regard, they are very, very jealous of Lawrence of Arabia, our man, who has, as anybody who's seen the film or read The Seven Pillars of Wisdom knows, a great knack for wooing the Arab tribes. It shows really to them, T.E. Lawrence's exploits show the importance of mobilizing Islam more broadly against their enemies.
And also I'd add to that point as well, just not just obviously the kind of religious side of it, but also like the anti-colonialist side of it. Because
yes, completely.
When we consider especially the sort of world and post World War I, you've still got kind of remnants of like the French Empire and also the British Empire too.
And this will become crucial as we move forward to World War II. This is the colonial element in the Middle East becomes really, really crucial to German strategy.
And similar to the way we were talking about Finland and kind of the Swedish Empire, the Russian Empire, like very similar kind of stories there, I think.
Indeed. So there is a growing German academic interest in Islam, led by a man called Max von Oppenheim, who studies Islam throughout from the sort of First World War right up to the Second World War, and in fact produces a memorandum in 1940 on how the Germans might go about mobilizing Muslim support. So obviously, First World War, there is an ultimate failure on the German part to make use of the non-Ottoman forces, the non-Ottoman Muslim forces. So the British appoint Amin al-Husseini. They appoint him as Grand Mufti of Jerusalem in 1921 after the death of his brother. And he is, although this sounds rather nepotistic, he is in fact quite carefully chosen to be said successor because he is seen to be supportive of Britain's policy in Palestine, the Palestine Mandate, the bringing of Jewish refugees to the nascent, to what's then called Yishuv, I should say, which is of course the nascent state of Israel. They actually invent the title Grand specifically for him. Interestingly, as just a way of kind of G'ing him up,
sweeten the
yeah,
a little bit.
Try and
So
win him over.
What if we called you great?
Yeah.
Like, would that help?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great Grand Mufti. That would be good.
Wow.
No, but they unfortunately misjudged this rather badly. He starts out as a cooperative player in the region, but soon turns on the British, organising resistance to both them and the incoming Jewish migration to Palestine. He incites violence against the Yishuv, as I said before, the Jewish community in Palestine before it becomes Israel proper, as well as leading violent pogroms in the region. So the Hebron massacre of 1929, for instance. So, coming forward now to the beginning of the early stages of the Second World War. Italian failures in the Balkans and North Africa in early 41 spur the German need to think about the Muslim world, to kind of re-engage with this problem that had been kind of rumbling along since the First World War. So, of course, Oppenheim's 1940 memorandum becomes quite handy to them. They start to look at it, take it seriously. And there is a clear realization of the Nazi Arab alignments around anti-Semitism. So there's as well as the kind of pragmatic stuff, my enemy's enemy is my friend, as we've been talking about in previous episodes, there is here a real ideological alignment between the Nazis and the Arab world. There is also a shared aversion to the idea of the clergy. Nazis obviously have this funny kind of ambivalent relationship with the church. They're not really too keen on the hierarchy, on priests and all the rest of it, but they understand that religion has to kind of take its role.
Well, yeah, they didn't quite go full state-sponsored atheism in the same way the Soviet Union.
Not like the Soviet Union. But anyway, this works quite well as far as the Arabs are concerned, because imams are much closer to judges and teachers than they are to priests or rabbis, if you like. Hitler is admired by the Arab independence movements for his stance on the Jews, as well as being a real credible threat to their colonial overlords, the British and the French in the Middle East, but also, interestingly, the Soviet Union in Central Asia, which I think is a kind of element to it that maybe you wouldn't think of when you think of the Muslim world. You don't really think, you think obviously Middle East, North Africa.
Yeah, you don't really consider, well, even within Russia, there's still like a significant Muslim population.
Well, precisely.
In like Chechnya or...
Yeah, and all around Armenia, Azerbaijan, all through the region, Georgia, there's a big Muslim population. Some even see him, some Muslims that is, see him as a Muslim in disguise. Such is his kind of brilliance at tackling all of their enemies at once. So the Germans train Arab militias both to overthrow colonial governments and to present armed resistance to Jewish immigration to Palestine. There's an establishment by the Nazi Foreign Office of an Islamic Central Institute in Berlin to work directly with Arab religious leaders, primarily al-Husseini. Al-Husseini himself, after this increased campaign of violence against the British and the incoming Jewish population, is finally, the British have had enough of him. They exile him in 1937, and he kind of pinballs all around the Middle East for a bit before ending up in Berlin in 1941. Now, this is where it gets quite interesting. Hitler receives the Mufti with great pomp. He puts on a fabulous... all the bells and whistles. He's given the real grand treatment, and sits down for a one-on-one. There's a good photo of them. Again, maybe we'll put it up. In which there's a meeting in which he stresses their common enemies. So, the Brits, the Jews, and the Bolsheviks primarily. But interestingly, the Mufti uses this opportunity quite intelligently to say, "Now, Mr. Hitler, this is all very well and good. We agree on lots of things." But what are you going to do about Palestine? Can you give me a guarantee of Palestinian freedom? And Hitler sort of swerves the question, returns to the sort of safer ground of what they have in common. And the Mufti is left without a clear answer. However, he stays in Berlin. He enjoys a lavish lifestyle and a salary, much like our friend Sean Russell from the previous episode. But he's really primarily important as a propaganda tool for the Nazis. So the Nazis see, they have this kind of idea of pan-Islam. So they have this quite simplistic notion of the Muslim world that all Muslims think alike, have the same aims, all the rest of it, which of course is a gross misunderstanding because like any religion,
people are individuals.
Yeah, of course. Well, and also you have the factions, you have the broad factions of Sunni, Shia, all the rest of it, as well as national and tribal identities being overlaid.
There's all different things at play here, really.
Yeah, so they have this kind of slightly simplistic notion, which means that they very much ignore what the Mufti's more about, which is his nationalist aims for Palestine. And they basically use him. They put him on radio as a kind of propaganda tool. All the while he's doing this, he's trying to press his own claims for nationhood, but to no avail. With the help of Himmler, interestingly, so Himmler himself, being a man who is very, very interested in the occult, who is very, very interested in religion. Takes more of an interest in the Muslims than does Hitler. I mean, Hitler, as we say, there was a feeling. David Motterdale, in his book Islam and Nazi Germany's War, makes the suggestion that, as I mentioned before, Hitler had been quite admiring of the Muslim troops in the First World War. He nevertheless is not really too keen on them. Of course, they are, again, a Semitic people, like the Jews in Hitler's racial hierarchy. That, of course, does not bode terribly well for them. He even calls the Egyptians decadent, uses the kind of classic Orientalist language, calls the Egyptians decadent in Mein Kampf. But he can sort of get behind Himmler's broad plan. So Himmler focuses in on the zealous mindset of the Arab soldier that makes them seriously fearless fighters. So we see this nowadays in Hamas, in ISIS, this notion, we worship death as you worship life. The 72 virgins in heaven awaiting the glorious martyr, all of this kind of stuff. So Himmler thinks, brilliant, if we can mobilize that feeling, that is cracking stuff. So, despite Hitler's mixed feelings, he nevertheless considers Muslims fully trustworthy for recruitment, especially as the war grinds on, and he feels the need to open up recruitment to non-German troops, divisions, brigades, etc., which he had been very, very strictly against in the early part of the war. There's an interesting comparison to the American Civil War, where the Confederacy is so desperate right at the end of the war in 1865 that they open up recruitment to extraordinarily the slaves on the southern plantations, which the idea of giving people who you have brutally oppressed guns to fight on your side when just over the way for them is freedom if they can turn on you is quite a desperate move indeed. But anyway, Hitler has a much more strategic kind of view and all the rest of it. So he doesn't trust many non-German populations, but the Muslims are one he fully gets behind, and he says, right, we can form brigades, we can give them arms, all the rest of it, they'll be really good fighters for us. So Himmler and al-Husseini, they form two non-German divisions. Within the Waffen-SS, there is a Bosnian Muslim division in the German-controlled NDH, as we said before, the independent, quote-unquote, state of Croatia, which is split into two divisions. The first Croatian, the Handschar, which means scimitar, so the knife, the Arab knife, sword rather, quite right, which is a big division, and a smaller division called the Kama, which is the second Croatian. So the Mufti visits the Balkans to give inflammatory speeches to boost recruitment, boost morale. He doesn't pull his punches in these speeches. He is pretty viciously anti-Semitic. It's all about kill the Jews wherever you may find them, is one of his famous phrases from another speech. So that's the kind of Waffen-SS side, the kind of elite side, if you will. But within the Wehrmacht, you have the Free Arabian Legion, or Arab Volunteers, made up primarily of Iraqi and North African POWs. They receive help not only from the Mufti, but also from the ex-Iraqi Prime Minister al-Gilani, who had fled to Germany after a failed anti-British revolt in 1941. It's intended to facilitate an offensive against the British in the Middle East, but that never materializes. So they are kind of broken up and used instead in North Africa, in the Caucasus, and for anti-partisan actions in Greece and Yugoslavia. Okay. Enter Walter Rauff, the inventor of the gas van execution method in the Holocaust. He, in 1942, is given the task of expanding said Holocaust to North Africa. There are 94,000 Jews in Libya at this point. So you can just imagine, had Rommel continued to flounce Monty and Patton in the desert, we would have been looking at a whole new front, horrifying front on the Holocaust. But thankfully, Rommel is stymied, and that puts paid to that, I should say. So after Barbarossa, after the which we should say is the initially successful but ultimately failed operation by which the Eastern Army, the Osttruppen of the Nazis, has been decimated in Russia. They have lost 750,000 men, or nearly that many. They desperately need to make up that shortfall, because that makes up about a third of the Eastern Army. So to lose a third of your army is
it's insane numbers.
Yeah. Well, if the word decimated means, going back to the Latin, to the Romans, losing 1 in 10, imagine losing 3 and a bit in 10. So interestingly, given, as we said before, Hitler's trust of the Muslim populations, they turn to Muslims in the Caucasus, in Crimea, in Azerbaijan, in Turkmenistan, Georgia, Armenia, etc., to recruit that shortfall. They use the anti-Soviet argument to persuade these populations, the Soviets being pretty brutal overlords, and I think, as we've spoken about before, ethnic minorities in these regions suffered quite grievously at the hands of the Soviets.
Well, I think it also reflects a wider pattern of kind of oppression by colonial powers. I mean, again, do you call the Soviet Union a colonial power in its own right, potentially? But
well, I suppose in the sense that it was essentially
not in the same way as
it had expanded its sphere of influence, shall we say, into other countries in a kind of quasi-colonial manner.
I mean, I suppose it also depends on what your definition of colonialism is.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Is that, taking over countries, exploiting them for resources and controlling their
populations,
and those kind of things. But obviously, like we were saying, it's all about kind of the anti-colonial sentiment that builds in these communities and these nations.
Yeah, precisely.
Former nations, at least.
So anyway, this whole movement to recruit Muslim populations is led by Klaus von Stauffenberg, who is an ex-North Africa, he's from the Afrika Korps, extremely effective soldier who later would become the kind of failed Hitler assassin of, I believe it's Valkyrie is the film with Tom Cruise, great film, if you haven't seen it. And he develops his aversion to Nazi high command after witnessing the brutal treatment of Slavs and Jews on the Eastern Front in this mission that he's sent on to recruit Muslim populations. So that's actually the moment when he is horrified and says, enough, and I must kill this evil madman. Johann von Leers, another character here, a Nazi propagandist, quickly rises through the ranks and is appointed by Goebbels as head of the Arab division. He transmits violent anti-Semitic messaging along with excerpts from the Quran over the radio in Arab states. And guess who's the star of the show on these radio broadcasts? It's none other than our friend, the Grand Mufti. And this is in one of these broadcasts where he says his famous phrase, kill the Jews wherever you may find them. It pleases God and history. So von Leers immerses himself in Arab culture. He's a fabulous linguist, taught Latin in Cairo, and actually becomes Gamal Abdel Nasser's personal tutor. He actually converts to Islam, and he changes his name to Omar Amin. Very eccentric, interesting character. But we'll come back to the connection with Nasser later on as we approach the Suez debacle. So right at the end of the war, Walter Rauff, the gas van man, if we can call him that, is arrested in Rome in April 1945. The Americans are kind of unaware of his importance in the Holocaust logistics. They think he's just another kind of grunt. And the US prison guards are therefore really too lax with him. He escapes on the 29th of December 1946, at which point he he teaches school children in Rome German under a false name, and is lauded by Pope Pius XII, who we mentioned before, who's Hitler's pope.
He's popping up a few times.
He is. He's poping up. You could say. So later on, so he lays low in Italy for a while. He's teaching school children, etc., under an assumed identity. Ralph is contacted by a Syrian officer in 1948. So the Syrians are interested in developing a security service, and Ralph gets a couple of his mates, Paul Stangl, who was the commandant of Treblinka, and Gustav Wagner, who was the commandant of Sobibor. He gets them, as well as 60 other ex-Nazis, to go to Syria. This is the plan he has. He through a sympathetic bishop whose name escapes me, he gets pontifical passes. So the Pope rubber stamps it. Sends them off to Syria to not only develop a security service for the Syrians, of course. The Germans. Why would they do this? What's the reason? Well, which state happens to be in very close proximity to Syria? Israel. So the Nazis think, okay, well, where we failed before in Eastern Europe, perhaps we can succeed now via the proxies of the Arab nation states. So he gives advice on establishing a security service and opens up a German bureau in Damascus. Now, interestingly, a kind of later development to this is that the security service that was actually founded by the Nazis in Syria is later developed into the truly horrifying machinery that is the al-Assad regime, sort of secret service, secret police, where some of the worst atrocities against humankind take place under first Hafez and then Bashar al-Assad, which brings us up, of course, to the present day and the recent change in leadership to a moderate, quote unquote, moderate jihadi leader who now runs Syria. So anyway, during the 1948 war, Yair Harari, I hope I'm not butchering that pronunciation, who's an Israeli spy, reports back to Mossad that the Syrian brigades all received German training. So we think perhaps we sense the hand of Walter Rauff and his comrades. The Nazis, of course, see this, as I've said before, they see this fight against Israel as a sort of Holocaust by proxy. And to go back to Nasser, to the Egyptian leader Nasser, he is at this point a sort of rank and file soldier. He fights in the 1948 war, and he observes, from the Egyptian side of the coin, he observes the unpreparedness of Egyptian troops. And he's kind of shocked by it and thinks at that point, okay, if we're going to try this again, I need to work out how we're going to modernize the Egyptian army, because this is really not working out too well. Anyway, back on the Syrian side, following the humiliating defeat all round of the Arab nation states in the 1948 war, the Syrian regime is deposed and Nazis begin to flee left, right and centre. Ralph himself goes underground and re-emerges in South America to live out his days in glorious sunshine with the likes of Eichmann, until he, of course, is abducted, and Mengele, ditto, and all of those characters. Others, however, stay put in the region and kind of dig in. So the Arab League, which is the collection of Arab nation states surrounding Israel, wants to modernize its army rapidly, so it recruits the Germans in the region to do so, understanding that the Germans are very, very good at all this kind of stuff. Most prominently, a man called Arthur Schmidt of the Afrika Korps is arrested following, who I should say was arrested following the defeat in North Africa in 1942, but was released in 1947. Is brought into the tent. He takes on the false name of Goldstein and befriends local Jewish ladies in the town who don't know his true identity, and if they had, would probably have had a heart attack. So a man named Abdel Khalil is an ex-Egyptian army officer, remembers the Germans coming to train their forces in the early 50s. So Schmidt himself, in part of all this, undertakes a recce of the Golan Heights, which is at the top of Israel that borders Syria, concludes that had the Syrians performed a blitzkrieg-like maneuver, they could have certainly overwhelmed Israeli forces and broken in and been far more successful than in fact they were. As a result of this, the Germans teach the Egyptian and Syrian forces blitzkrieg tactics for use in future offences. Another character here, sorry, lots of names, I'm afraid. Gerhard Martins, who's a formidable Waffen-SS special operations leader, and interestingly later Mercedes-Benz's representative in Egypt. Lives a very, very lavish lifestyle with his Mercedes-Benz salary.
Side hustle.
Very good, a very effective side hustle indeed. Made Egyptian troops perform extraordinary training exercises. He has them running up and down the pyramids in full military gear, if you can picture it. And he has them doing parachute drops from only 500 feet, which is very, very low indeed, which results in the slightly comical image of these troops hanging from balconies with their parachutes all tangled up, very kind of Dad's Army, and landing in sports club swimming pools and sort of surprising the locals in that way. He writes a guerrilla warfare manual for the Egyptian army, which becomes very, very useful in their modernization. Churchill catches whiff of all this, and he's very concerned given the developing tensions around the Suez Canal. The last thing he needs is the Germans getting involved in Egypt. There's a sort of mercenary element to this. There's a fear of, or mercantile, I should say. There's a fear of the German industrial encroachment on their private hunting ground, as one German calls it in a letter. So when Comrade Adenauer, the man responsible for the economic miracle of West Germany, when he is on a state visit to Britain, Churchill puts it to him that this is all going on, and he replies that his hands are tied, it's a private enterprise, he couldn't possibly do anything, kind of wriggles free of that one. The rapidly decolonizing Arab nations present wonderful new markets for West German industry, boosting the aforementioned economic miracle. And most interestingly of all, German businessmen, many of them ex-Nazis, trade on this Arab nostalgia for Nazism to smooth deals in the region. One even gives a Hitler salute. So this is considered to be a very diplomatic way of doing business in the Middle East. The finance ministry back home sees this as rather distasteful, but it understands the realpolitik. It wants to expand. It sort of turns a blind eye to some of this.
Also, they're probably looking at like the money aspect of it. And just
well, quite,
like,
yeah.
I'll turn the other like.
If the dollar is rolling in, why question it? You know. So yeah, exactly. As well as the fact that it's a simple fact of the matter that a lot of Nazis, on the administrative end, were they were administrators under the Third Reich, and then at the end of the war, they were administrators under the West Germany.
Instances of like the Americans, the British, kind of turning the other way when it came to like letting Sunnis like administrators off the hook.
Yeah. Well, and the American chapter is fascinating because the Americans are very, very keen, in fact, the CIA certainly, of letting ex-Nazis into America, because who is their enemy now? Of course, it's the Reds, it's the communists, and who hates the communists more than anybody? The fascists. So there is a real sort of realpolitik. We don't really mind.
It's a real alignment almost.
Yeah. They're quite happy to put up with a load of
like, well, you might have committed war crimes, but you make some mean spreadsheet.
Yeah,
so
yeah, exactly. They
look the other way for that.
Yeah, very efficient. Yeah, very efficient. No, but on the other side of this coin, interestingly, David Ben-Gurion, first Prime Minister of Israel, is very, very pragmatic, very, very pragmatic man. He's reliant to an extent on funds from Adenauer. So he is quite willing to minimize the number of Nazi prosecutions. So he basically puts a dampener on Mossad and Simon Wiesenthal and the Nazi hunters, and says to them, guys, like, we need some money from the Germans. Let's not go too crazy here. Let's just get the big guys and let a lot of the smaller guys go. So he is totally pragmatic on that front. And so you don't actually see that many in Israel itself. You've got the famous Eichmann trial, of course, but you don't really see that many trials of prominent Nazis because they were trying to keep West Germany sweet and continuing to raise this rather uncomfortable spectre of the war. It was not terribly good for business. So anyway, after the Suez Crisis itself, which I needn't go into, it's very well known about indeed, von Leers, the great linguist who was, of course, Nasser's personal tutor, eccentric man who converts to Islam and all the rest of it. He is recruited by the BND, which is the West German Secret Service, with the not very subtle codename Nazi Emmy, to use his closeness to Nasser to gain intelligence. However, he was a little bit too loose-lipped and flaunted his admiration for the Reich in neo-Nazi papers, drew far too much attention to himself, so he was judged, additionally as well, it was judged to be inefficient and possibly even insane, so the Nazis, not the Nazis, rather the West German Secret Service, the BND, thought perhaps not, perhaps we'll drop him. Nasser, to go back to him, employs various Jewish question, quote-unquote, specialists in his government, as well as in von Leer's radio station, which is called Voice of Arabia. Again, we had during the war, we now have after the war, the Grand Mufti reprising his role as the great star of the radio and giving these violently anti-Semitic speeches. Nasser decides he's going to make the Palestinian cause a priority. He wants to modernize the abilities of intelligence and propaganda in Egypt. So he thinks a good way to be popular, a good way to win support is to prioritize Palestine. He uses in his propaganda war the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is the famous notorious forgery from, I believe, 1903, which originated in Russia, I want to say, which was, of course, the sort of birth of the official conspiracy theory about Jews being, running the world, sort of puppet masters, pulling the strings, all of this kind of stuff. So he's very keen on the Protocols of Elders of Zion. He uses that as well as expelling all British and French expats and Egypt's small Jewish population as well. The last Jews who are left in Egypt after all of this finally leave after the 1967 war. In all of this propaganda, the visual representations of Jews are, fascinatingly, very, very similar indeed to the ones we traditionally associate with Goebbels' propaganda, with Nazi Germany's propaganda. And the Muslim Brotherhood, who are founded in Egypt in 1928, and who are now banned in most Middle Eastern countries, although interestingly not in many Western countries such as Britain or America, they write a 1956 pamphlet which states that Hitler's name awakes sympathy and enthusiasm in the heart of our movement. So despite an obvious affinity for such ideas, Nasser takes the clever political decision not to align his government with the Brotherhood, as this would give his critics the smoking gun they needed to label him anti-Semitic. So that kind of wraps up the story. I would say I'll just give you a quick coda on how this kind of impacts on today. Interestingly, last year, a film called A Century in 6 Years was released in Egypt. It's a film depicting a fictional meeting between the Mufti's grandson, a fictional grandson called Sheikh Hareth, and Hitler's non-existent, obviously, grandson, where the grandson of the Mufti asks Hitler's grandson to honour the promise of freeing Palestine given by Hitler to the Mufti. Of course, this is fictional on many, many fronts, not least the fact that Hitler, as we said before, had not actually promised to, quote-unquote, free Palestine. However, the film acts as though he had, and then posits these two grandsons who have this conversation. Remarkable, overall, just a remarkable concept for a film. And what's even more remarkable is that it was highly feted in Egypt. It won a jury prize. This is 2024, remember, we're talking about. It's won a jury prize and a mention for Best Actor at the Sharqiya International Film Festival in Oman. It was shown in the Cairo Francophone Cinema Exhibition and the Kairoun Cinema Days Festival in Tunisia in February 2024. It was promoted by the Egyptian Filmmaker Syndicate. It was also due to be shown at the Emirates Film Festival, but one of the creators, Mohammed Nassef, for unknown reasons, pulled out. The poster, which again maybe we can put up, features the quote-unquote sheikh, the fictional sheikh, in front of a large swastika. Both of its main actors have openly shared anti-Semitic remarks and conspiracy theories on their social media. Again, as we saw in Ireland after the war, little sense of distaste, little sense of repulsion being expressed at all of this. And so we can say that this plays into a long history of Egyptian anti-Semitism. Arabic translations of Mein Kampf have long been a staple, along with the the aforementioned protocols of the Elders of Zion, of the Cairo International Book Fair, as revealed by the Simon Wiesenthal Center, who study these things. Naturally, this, as well as Turkish versions, interestingly, Mein Kampf was a bestseller in Turkey in 2005. All of these versions excise Hitler's disparaging comments on the Arabs in general, for obvious reasons, as well as specifically his Orientalist descriptions of the Egyptians as decadent. Wouldn't really do to be leaving those rather disparaging passages in place. So the Anti-Defamation League states that 75% of Egypt's population hold anti-Semitic views, especially conspiracies about the global dominance, the protocols theory, and Egypt, of course, has a long history of Holocaust denial. Bizarrely, the film was accused by some of propagating the Zionist narrative by even raising this historical connection, as though somehow a film that openly celebrated anti-Semitism and the Mufti's Nazi collaboration would somehow be playing into Netanyahu's hands. It doesn't really make an awful lot of sense. They say that why didn't the filmmakers make films about the Nakba instead, about the disaster as it's known in the Palestinian historical consciousness from 1947.
We kind of really discount the countries that contributed, but maybe they weren't like, they were occupied throughout the war.
But I'd apply that also to Commonwealth countries too, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I think we overlook the massive contribution from the Anzac forces.
At the time, you could still count the UK as a superpower. Yeah. America was a rising superpower.
Those were the days.
Sleeping giant kind of wakes up and takes control, and that obviously then kind of drives forward the growth of America as a superpower.
In the late 50s, the sort of biblical epic dies out, but you've still got that hankering for big subjects, big epics, and so World War II kind of fills that vacuum in a really interesting way.
And now we're getting loads more films where people from Norway or Denmark or Sweden are able to tell their stories in a more kind of polished way.
The Italian tank, it's got 1 forward gear and 2 reverse. That's the old...
I don't think I've heard that one.
Yeah.